Hey guys, Daphne here. I'm a mom of two, a volleyball coach, and a handcrafted enthusiast. In today's video, I'm going to talk about what pushing is like during active labor. Let's get into it. When you're in labor and you get to about 9 centimeters or so, and your cervix has lowered to a place that's closer to the outside of your body, you'll be told that you should get ready to start pushing. During the entire process, you're likely wearing 2 monitors over your belly, one which monitors the baby and one which monitors your contractions, and that usually is worn for the entire of your labor. It sounds really weird, but if you can feel your contractions now, it's a really good thing. It gives you a pointer as to when to push. Now, if you're like me and at some point you had to take the epidural because the pain was so severe, then you may not even be able to feel your contractions. In the birth of my son, I actually couldn't feel anything, but not to worry, because you're wearing the band, people can tell when you're having a contraction by looking at the monitor. So my nurses would tell me, okay, now is the time to push. You'll likely be told to get into some kind of a squat position. So whether you're lying down or you're sitting up or kind of inclined, you're going to be asked to get your body into what looks like a squatting position. So your knees are going to be the closest they've ever been to your face in your life. I was asked to help the squatting process by putting my own hands either around my knees or under my knees and to pull my own legs towards me. And that sounds all really good, but I didn't find that helped give me any leverage at all, and I often deviated and would hold on to like the bed frame or something else. Your support person may be asked to help in this squatting position. So my husband, bless his heart, he thought that he wasn't going to see anything, even if I was pushing a baby out. He thought, just stay by the head and I'll never see what happened below the belt. And that just didn't happen. He saw everything. So he actually was holding one of my legs and pushing my knee to my face for me. And yes, he saw every little piece, every second, every drop of bodily fluid that he could have seen. Now, the motion of pushing has often been described as similar to when you're trying to get out a big poo. But I just didn't really feel that was accurate for me. So if you're really diligent with your Kegel exercises or have really good body awareness, then you can differentiate between the muscles that would help with pooing and the muscles that belong in the vaginal area. But the motions are similar. And the feeling and the pressure are similar, but they are 2 separate areas. Here's your first tip. If you're having trouble locating where those muscles are during labor, have someone like a support person or a midwife or a nurse just gently make contact with that area. So maybe to place a finger just gently externally on your perineum. For me, that really helped to remind myself where that area was and to be pushing there. Tip number 2, don't worry about pooing on the table or anything. There's a lot of literature that talks about that, and it just may not happen. In both of my deliveries, my husband testifies that I actually did not poo on the delivery table at all. And I didn't hold back from eating prior to delivery. I ate whenever I was hungry, and I didn't stop for fear that during pushing I would poo. And even if this happens, the people who are going to be delivering your baby are professionals. They spend their working hours seeing things and bodily fluids coming out of people's bodies. And for me, I knew that anytime something was going to happen, that my nurses would try to maintain my dignity and integrity as a mom. And often what they would do, if some fluid leaked out, they would often just quickly wipe it up or change the sheet for me, and we would move on. It wasn't even a conversation, and it wasn't something that I should have worried about. When it came time for actual pushing, I was asked to push for 10 seconds straight, and then I was able to take like a 1-2 second breath and then push for another 10 seconds. After those pushes, if the contraction was over, then I would rest and wait for the next contraction to start. Or if the contraction was still happening, then maybe I could try for one more push. When I was very, very close to delivering, the OB came into my room and shone these gigantor lights that are warm and very bright, and they're from the ceiling onto my area, and everyone just watched. It sounds weird to describe now, but in the moment, you've honestly been doing a lot up to this point, and a lot of people have seen and touched you at this point. And it didn't seem that big of a deal at the time. Tip number 3, always follow instructions when pushing. My daughter came out in such a way that if I'd kept pushing, the cord that was just kind of draped around her neck would have actually tightened around her neck. Now I know that sounds really, really scary, but because I listened to the instructions and I paused when she was coming out, it was a really simple maneuver to just move the cord and shift it to another position, and then I could continue. So how long does active pushing go on for? Well, for my son, I pushed for 2 hours straight, non-stop. There was no break other than in between contractions. But then for my daughter, I was only pushing for 15 minutes and she was born. So it can be a long pushing session or a short one. And what I've heard and what's my experience is that the first one might be a little bit longer and your subsequent pregnancies might be a little shorter. When we got to the final pushes, the nurses and OBs told me that if I had an overwhelming urge to push, to just push and to not wait for another contraction. And that really did happen with both of my kids. At one point, I just felt like, oh, I have to push right now. From what it felt like, that's probably the point where baby's head was right perfectly at the smallest space possible. And the pressure was just so great that I had to push, I had to get it out. In both deliveries, after that point, it took maybe 1 to 5 pushes to get baby out. Tip number 4, research some assisted delivery options. Now, obviously, everyone wants to have a really simple, clean, healthy delivery. But sometimes you just need a little bit of help. And to do your research ahead of time means that in a moment of stress or anxiety, you won't be forced to make a decision about something you're not educated about. Assisted delivery options is things like vacuums or forceps. Do you even want someone to break your water for you? And what tools are used for that? And of course, it's a good idea to have some education about what a C-section is, how it might affect you, the process in which it happens, and if it really happens to you and you really, really wanted a vaginal birth, it's really important to understand that millions of women go through C-sections all the time. And it's just another way of having a healthy delivery. And there's different repercussions with having to have a C-section and have a vaginal birth. None is better than the other or worse than the other. They both have their pros and their cons, but it is important to have an understanding about a C-section so that if it comes time to that, you won't be totally in the dark as to what that process is. Now, both of my kids were born vaginally, but I will admit that for my son's delivery, because I'd been pushing for 2 hours straight, I was convinced that I would have to have a C-section. I was just exhausted, and I thought, it's taking too long. At some point, he just has to come out. While I didn't end up needing a C-section, my son did require a vacuum. Basically, my son has a gigantic head, and this being my first delivery, maybe my hips weren't quite in the correct wideness that was needed for him to get his head out. So I was pushing and pushing against the smallest part of my pelvis, and he would push and do really well and make progress, but then I would rest and he would sort of retract back in. So the vacuum was used to sort of hold him in that position while I rested so that the next push would actually get him through. And immediately that worked. He had a little circle on his head, but otherwise he was born totally healthy, and that vacuum saved the day for me. What I realized is that assisted delivery options like vacuums and forceps and C-sections are nothing to be ashamed of, and sometimes everyone just needs a little bit of help. In the aftermath of pushing with my son, I felt like I'd just done the most intense, the most difficult bodily workout of my entire life. Pushing felt like I had used every single tiny little fiber muscle in my body to get this human out. Even little muscles in my fingers were hurting and sore afterwards. I felt like my hair hurt, like every piece of muscle that I had been flexed for 10 seconds twice every few minutes. The good news is that once baby is born, there's a sense of euphoria that kind of goes over your whole body, and there's a lot of adrenaline too. So while there were a lot of people in my room for both times, and while I was still exposed, and in some case I was getting stitched up, or maybe, my placenta was getting pushed out, I was so fixed on my newborn that I kind of thought everything else was in a bit of a fog, and I didn't really feel a lot of pain. In fact, with my son, at some point during pushing, my epidural had completely fallen out, and it was actually just dangling on a cord beside me, and I didn't even realize it because my son was on me. And so even when they were stitching me up, I actually technically wasn't on any sort of epidural drug. And my fifth and last tip is to try to relax ahead of pushing. It really does take all of your energy and all of your muscles to get the baby out. If you're anything like me, maybe your experience will be different, but for me, it was a very difficult exercise to do. It's a really personal decision, but for me, I was really glad that I took the epidural because it gave me a chance to rest and sort of get some energy back and sleep prior to having to go through this insane workout. Whichever way your baby is born, I hope you have a smooth and healthy delivery. I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, or maybe it really wasn't, and you had a totally different experience, then leave me a comment below, and I want to have this conversation with you to be a part of the support in your pregnancy journey. Head over to my website through the link in the description below, where you can buy the pregnancy planner as well as other creations of mine. If you want more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram at daffodils.designs and at pregnancyplanner.ca. See you next time.